Chapter 1. How China Took Over the Global Shipbuilding Industry. We live in a world of objects. Phones, clothes, cars, furniture, almost everything we touch arrives via the sea. Every single item has traveled across oceans, sometimes for thousands of miles, carried by enormous vessels that dwarf city buses, skyscrapers, and even the imagination of most people. Yet few of us ever pause to ask who built the giants that carry these goods across the oceans. If you asked that question in 1995, the answer would have been obvious. Japan or South Korea dominated shipbuilding. China? Not even a footnote. In the 1990s, China was making small cargo vessels for rivers, toys, textiles, and low-end manufacturing goods, not the massive 200,000-ton commercial vessels that fuel global trade. Fast forward less than 3 decades. China has become the world's shipbuilding powerhouse, constructing over half of the global commercial fleet. How did this transformation happen? Was it luck? A brilliant invention? A sudden eureka moment? No. This was a deliberate, patient, multi-billion-dollar strategy executed with precision on every level: engineering, financing, workforce, and market disruption. This is about how China conquered the oceans without firing a single shot, a story of ambition, planning, and relentless execution. Chapter 2. The 1990s Context. To understand the scale of China's rise, we must first look at the giants they had to slay. In the 1990s, Japan was the elder statesman. They had perfected the art of lean manufacturing. Their ships were known for surgical precision, fuel efficiency, and a level of reliability that justified their premium price tags. Then there was South Korea, the scrappy upstart. Companies like Hyundai, Heavy Industries, and Samsung Heavy Industries were hungry. They focused on innovation, building massive dry docks and pushing the boundaries of what was possible in naval architecture in Europe. Europe held the high ground of the luxury niche. They weren't building bulk carriers for coal. They were building floating palaces, cruise ships, and highly specialized technical vessels that required centuries of engineering heritage. China, at this time, was nowhere. In 1995, China's share of global shipbuilding was roughly 5%. Their yards were inefficient, their technology was decades behind, and their workforce lacked the specialized training required for blue water vessels. No international shipping line in London or Hamburg would have trusted a Chinese yard with a $100 million contract. But behind the closed doors of Beijing, a profound realization was taking root. If China was to become the world's factory, they couldn't just produce the goods, they had to control the means of transporting them. Chapter 3. The Strategic Label. The Blueprint of Power. In most capitalist economies, industries rise and fall based on the invisible hand of the market. If a shipyard is inefficient, it goes bankrupt. If demand drops, the industry shrinks. In China, the rules are different. In the late 90s, the Chinese government officially designated shipbuilding as a strategic industry. This label is the most powerful tool in the Chinese economic arsenal. Once an industry is deemed strategic, the rules of free market capitalism are suspended. Strategic means that profit is no longer the primary metric for success. National interest, market share, and technological sovereignty take its place. The government wasn't looking for a return on investment in 5 years. They were looking for dominance in 50. This designation allowed the state to coordinate every level of the economy, from the banks providing the cash to the universities providing the mines, and the steel mills providing the bones. The destiny of the Chinese Maritime Empire was written on a drawing board long before the first modern steel beam was ever lifted. Chapter 4. Reshaping the Earth. The Infrastructure Revolution. Before you can build the world's largest ships, you must build the world's largest factories. China looked at its coastline and saw a blank canvas. While European yards were trapped in ancient, cramped cities with no room to expand, China had the space and the political will to move mountains. Coastal provinces like Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Liaoning were transformed into sprawling industrial hubs. These weren't just shipyards, they were industrial ecosystems. The scale was unimaginable. The government invested billions in carving out massive dry docks, some stretching over 1,600 feet in length. To give you a sense of scale, you could fit several city blocks inside one of these docks. They installed gantry cranes towering monsters that could lift 2,000-ton ship sections as if they were Lego bricks, but it wasn't just about the yards. They built deep-water channels, massive logistics hubs, and entire cities to house the workers. By the time Western competitors looked up from their balance sheets, China had created more shipbuilding berths than the rest of the world combined. They built the capacity first, knowing that the orders would follow once the trap was set. Chapter 5. The Money Fountain, the Financial Siege. How does a country build an entire industry from scratch without going bankrupt? In the West, shipbuilding is a high-risk gamble. Private banks demand high interest, collateral, and quick repayment. One bad year can sink a century-old firm. China bypassed this risk through state-led financing. State-owned banks, primarily the China Development Bank and the Export-Import Bank of China, turned on the money fountain. They provided policy loans massive sums of capital at near-zero interest rates with grace periods that lasted a decade. But they went a step further. They created buyer's credit. Imagine you are a Greek shipping tycoon. You want to buy 10 new tankers. A Korean yard offers them for $500 million. A Chinese yard offers them for $400 million. And a Chinese bank offers to lend you the money at 1% interest to buy them. The choice isn't just easy, it's inevitable. By weaponizing finance, China ensured that their yards were never empty. Even when they were technically losing money on a per-ship basis, the state kept the lights on. The goal was to crush the competition through financial endurance. Chapter 6. Stealing the Fire, the Knowledge Transfer. Steel and money are useless without brains. China knew they were 30 years behind in marine engineering. They couldn't wait 30 years to catch up. They needed a shortcut. The solution was a two-pronged strategy: mass education and strategic recruitment. First, they turned their technical schools into factories of talent. They didn't just teach engineering, they taught hyper-specialized niches. Students spent years studying marine steel fatigue, hydrodynamic efficiency, and cryogenic welding. Every year, tens of thousands of specialized shipbuilders entered the workforce. Second, they went after the gray matter. When the shipbuilding industry in Japan and Europe slowed down, China moved in. They offered retired Japanese and Korean engineers salaries they couldn't refuse to come to China and teach. They signed licensing agreements with European firms like MAN and Wärtsilä. These agreements allowed China to build world-class engines locally. Every engine assembled was a classroom. Every ship built was a lesson. Within a decade, the students weren't just following the blueprints, they were rewriting them. Chapter 7. The Supply Chain Fortress, Vertical Integration. One of the greatest weaknesses of Western shipbuilding is the supply chain. A yard in Germany might get its steel from Brazil, its engines from Finland, and its electronics from Japan. One delay in a Suez Canal transit or a strike in a foreign port, and the entire project grinds to a halt. China eliminated this vulnerability through vertical integration. They built a supply chain fortress. They didn't just build the shipyard, they built the steel mill next door. They built the glass factory that made the bridge windows, the furniture plant that outfitted the crew quarters, and the electronics hub that manufactured the navigation systems. This meant zero logistics delays. If a shipyard needed a specific marine-grade steel plate, it didn't wait for a ship to arrive from across the ocean. It waited for a truck to drive 10 miles. This cluster effect created an efficiency that no other nation could match. China wasn't just building a ship. They were building the entire industrial DNA of the maritime world. Chapter 8. The Wal-Mart Strategy, Market Disruption. By the early 2000s, China was ready to strike. Their weapon of choice was price disruption. They entered the market with a Wal-Mart philosophy: high volume, low margins, and prices that made no sense to their competitors. Chinese ships were often priced 20% to 30% lower than their Korean or Japanese counterparts. To the rest of the world, this looked like economic suicide. "They're losing money on every hull," the analyst cried. And they were right. But they missed the point. China wasn't trying to make a profit in 2005, they were trying to make the competition go extinct. Shipping giants like Maersk, MSC, and COSCO have one priority: cost efficiency. If a Chinese yard could deliver a ship that was good enough for $30 million less, the choice was made. As the orders flooded into China, the yards gained something more valuable than profit: experience. With every ship, their quality improved. With every year, their credibility grew. Meanwhile, yards in Europe and Japan were forced to either cut their own throats to match the price or leave the market entirely. Many chose to leave. Chapter 9. The 2008 Crucible, Survival of the Fittest. The 2008 global financial crisis was the ultimate test. Global trade stopped. Shipping rates plummeted to zero. New ship orders vanished overnight. For private shipyards in the West and South Korea, this was a death sentence. Thousands of workers were laid off. Historic yards in Germany, Spain, and the UK closed their gates forever. Even the South Korean giants were forced into painful restructuring and government bailouts, but China did the unthinkable. They doubled down. While the world was retreating, the Chinese government poured more money into their shipyards. They used state-owned shipping lines to place ghost orders, buying ships they didn't immediately need just to keep the yards running and the workers employed. When the world economy finally began to crawl back in 2012, the landscape had changed. The competition had been decimated. Their capacity had shrunk. But China? China emerged with more yards, more workers, and more advanced technology than they had before the crisis. They had survived the winter, and now, the spring belonged to them. Chapter 10. Shattering the High-Tech Ceiling. For a long time, the West comforted itself with a myth. China can only build the cheap stuff. They believed China would dominate the bulk carriers, the pickup trucks of the sea, while the West and Korea would keep the high-tech prize, LNG carriers and ultra-large container ships. They were wrong. China began a relentless assault on the high-tech ceiling. They invested billions into research and development. Companies like Hudong-Zhonghua Shipbuilding focused on the most difficult task in naval engineering, the LNG carrier. These ships are essentially giant thermos flasks. They carry natural gas cooled to minus 162 degrees Celsius. If the tank leaks, the ship explodes. If the steel gets too cold, it cracks like glass. It requires the most advanced welding and insulation technology on the planet. For decades, Korea owned this market. But China broke in. They didn't just copy the designs, they innovated. They built bigger, more efficient tanks. They delivered ships ahead of schedule. Today, China isn't just competing for high-tech contracts, they are winning them. The technology gap that once protected the global elite has evaporated. Chapter 11. The New World Order, the 2025 Reality. As we stand in 2025, the takeover is complete. China does not merely participate in the shipbuilding industry, it is the industry. When you control over 50% of the world's ship construction, you control more than just steel. You control the pace of global trade. You decide the environmental standards for the next generation of green ships. You decide the pricing that every other nation must follow. Shipbuilding is the mother of industries. It connects to steel, electronics, logistics, and national defense. By dominating the sea, China has built a modern industrial empire that is virtually impossible to dismantle.